Welcome back, everyone, to Behind the Page. My name is CJ Tallarico, and today we have a very special guest on the show. If you're a Dawn of DC reader, you know him from Speed Force. If not, you might already know him as the artist of several Rick and Morty comics, a lot more, Super Pro KO, Rico Nasty Nightmare Vacay, and of course, a lot more. Welcome to the show, Jarrett Williams. How are you?
I'm great. Well, you really did your research.
I try to. I try to.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much again. So I usually ask like a lot of creators just to start. I want to know how long you've been reading comics, if there's any defining runs that made you appreciate the
Oh,
medium more. I feel like there's a pretty clear influence of manga in a lot of your work, that if there's any
okay.
manga you want to plug too, that'd be awesome.
Well, like early on, I grew up in New Orleans, and so my introduction to comics was actually the Time Picayune newspaper. Like my grandfather was pretty much like my best bud, like growing up. Like watched me every morning. All through the summer, I was at his house, and he would always start off his day reading the newspaper with a cup of coffee, and he would always hand me the comic section. So that was the start right there. Like just Calvin Hobbes. One of my favorite comic strips to this day, and one of my favorite creators is Ray Billingsley, who did the comic strip Curtis. And it's still ongoing. And it was the first time I actually saw like a comic with a kid I could relate to, like black kid. His family lived in like Brownstone, and just his day-to-day school adventures. And I used to just draw those characters like Calvin and Curtis and Peanuts. And at the time, my parents just kind of noticed that, oh, wait, like I was the quiet kid. I was kind of to myself,
Mhm.
total nerd. And I just like to read. And whenever I got a free moment, I was drawing. And so my mom put me in art class from like first grade on. And it just, like, once I was in art class, it was a wrap. It just felt right. Um, I was one of those kids, like, if everybody in my family was watching football or like whatever, basketball, I was in the other room drawing, or
Yeah.
mainly because I knew the TV would be free and I could like play Mario. Um, and so, yeah, that's just been sort of my trajectory ever since, which is art or class. And then I kind of knew that I wanted to get into sort of a creative industry. Like I was thinking my whole like childhood that I was going to go into animation. And then I ended up going to the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts in New Orleans for about 4 years studying visual arts. And when it was time to think of college, I was looking at like Cal Arts. I was looking at RISD. Ended up settling on the Savannah College of Art Design, and they had a sequential art program. But I wasn't too sure they also had an animation program. And after my first year, enough professors kind of said, "Hey, like you really should consider sequential art just from looking at my work and my interest." And my first class was Intro to Sequential Art with John Lowe, who at the time was doing a bunch of comics for, I believe, Archie and Marvel,
Cool.
and gave me some of the best advice. Just everything from, had to take more anatomy classes because my anatomy was just off. And at that time, I thought I was trying to go, into mainstream comics. I was reading manga, I was reading like Dragon Ball and Ram and a Half. My art style naturally was cartoony. And whenever I would try to do more of a mainstream style, it just did not click. Something was just off. Whenever I leaned cartoony, like the newspaper strips and manga, it just clicked. Like people naturally responded to it better. Editors did, even when I started doing portfolio reviews. And once I just started really leaning into cartoony style, just like at my essence, just like me on the page, like just style and songs, it just connected. Like everything sort of started coming together in a more organic way versus me trying to force uh,
Hmm.
my hand at Spider Man. Um, Things that just didn't naturally. But now I think if I were to approach it now in my style, maybe.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was just a no. It was a hell no. And then I started getting my foot in the door with comic conventions around 2004,
Hmm.
and that was eye opening because I was just walking through Artist Alley, just like asking questions. I was doing mini comics at the time and ash cans, and I remember showing one of my little 6-page mini comics to Andy Rutten, who was doing this comic called Owly, and he gave me all this advice about how just to work on the binding of my mini comics and consider this sort of paper for your cover next time, and just really useful advice. Um, and just going to comic conventions from like Otakon to Baltimore to just San Diego, like I was just hitting them up. I was going to at one point at least like maybe easy 5 to 12, 15 shows a year. Me and my
Wow.
friends just hopping in a car going to Comic Cons,
Hmm.
sometimes two a month. And it was a you know,
I'm
like a
sure that
bunch of us
sounds
just
overwhelming.
popped. It was like, but I also felt like I had to just to get my foot in the
Mhm.
door, just to kind of be in the mix, because I was hearing all the conversations that were happening, like on the con floor and after the show, all the creatives just going to the bar and just like, you know, just talking. And it's like, this just feels right. Like that electricity, literally, you know, no pun intended with Speed Force,
Yeah.
but it just felt right. And I'm really, really glad that I just kept going with it because it was a very hard industry to navigate. I should say it presently is still a hard industry to navigate, but having just sort of that insight from established artists and creatives was really helpful early on.
That's awesome. So I know you started doing more like web comics before breaking into any license work. Is that around like the same time you started doing that on your
Yes.
channel? Mhm.
Yeah. Around 2004, I was doing a webcomic called Lunar Boy, and I was updating it about one point once a week, and then I bumped it up to twice a week. And it was just sort of a newspaper strip format at first. And I did that for a while before I transitioned to a page format because I was like, oh, if I do this, as pages, I can collect them and self-publish.
Mhm.
And at the time, I was using a website called the Lulu, I think it was called, and they were great. Like, it was expensive. I was working at the time at Banana Republic, so I was doing about honestly too many hours, like sometimes 50, 60 hours a week just to pay like uh, you know, school tuition. I had an off-campus apartment, art supplies, just
It adds
I
up.
was
It
working
adds up.
so fast, this was around 2004. And I was just happy to have my own place. I was like, yeah, I moved off campus, like I'm an adult now and I'm working off nonstop, but then I'm trying to go to these Comic Cons on the weekend. My folks thought I was crazy. They were just like, every time we call you, you're always somewhere else. Like you just need to settle and focus on school. And I'm like, this is part of school. This is part of what I'm trying to do. Um, and at the time, that was the hardest thing was to convince my parents just because, I was the only artist in the family. So they didn't really have like an idea of what this trajectory looked like. They just were nervous.
Mhm.
They were like, like starving artist stereotypes are real. And they were worried that I wasn't going to be able to sustain myself after college. So they were always kind of like, just stay put, save money, save money, save money.
Yeah.
Um, but back to your original question about the webcomics, yeah, that's where I started. I started with webcomics. I was collecting them into books, and then eventually an editor at Only Press, like James Lucas Jones, he was like, "Yo, I've been noticing that you've been consistently updating your webcomic. Like, I had on my like header for the site updates every Tuesday, Friday, or something like that." And
Mhm.
he was like, "I've been following you for a year. You haven't missed." And I was like, "I didn't even know you were like, reading my comic. That
Yeah.
was crazy to me." But it kind of helped with my like reputation for at least like delivering hitting deadlines because that's a huge component of why I get work now. A lot of the gigs I get, especially on the art side, there's usually a tight window. Maybe sometimes they'll reach out to me directly, but then sometimes I'm like fill in because maybe another artist got sick or just ghosted.
Mhm.
And so it's really helped me to be able to like at least have the reputation of like delivering on time.
Mhm. What does your schedule look like then, balancing between writing some books, drawing some others? Do you have like certain times you lay out for like this is how long I'm going to work on Speed Force,
Mm-hmm.
this is how long Rick and Morty?
Well, admittedly, like Speed Force was kind of like the curveball this year. Like I had my whole year mapped out. I was like, okay, I'm going to be doing Rick and Morty Inks, and then I was working on, or I am working on, finishing right now. I'm like 15 pages away from finishing this 300 plus page graphic novel. Work is,
Congratulations.
thank you. No, I'm excited because like I've been working on this since like 2020. So to now be at the tail end, I'm like, yes, and it feels so good when you're at the finish line, but it's also like that final, like, okay, you gotta like, I did track and cross country. So you do swim?
Yeah, yeah.
I was like essentially cross country, like you just tell me to run fast in that direction, I'll go. And
Yeah.
it's that feeling at the very end where you're like, yo, I'm about to like, I'm almost there. I can see the finish line, but I am white. And
Mhm.
that's sort of how it feels right now. But I was working on this last summer, and I was also like, okay, I'm going to be doing Rick and Morty come maybe October to December. And then DC reached out about Speed Force. And at first I thought it was like a joke because they were not on my radar at all. Like
Yeah.
I was sort of thinking, you know what, like I'm going to be going this independent comic path. I'm going to be pitching ideas the rest of my life. And that's just sort of the trajectory. And the editor, Chris, reached out, and I was just like, at first I thought it was a joke. And then I put my phone down and just kind of went back to like
Yeah.
processing, like, wait, that actually is an email. And there's an official, like, title and everything in there that looks legit. I don't know why I was just so paranoid, but it just felt very surreal.
I can
And
imagine.
yeah, and at that point, I was like, okay, they're reaching out just to see if I'm interested at, at pitching and ideas. And I just didn't know how I would make it work with the schedule. I'm like, I'm drawing nonstop. And the way it works is I'll get a script for Rick and Morty. And within like a week of getting that script, I'm turning around layouts. And my layouts are tight enough to actually be my pencils.
Hmm.
And so then from there, it's like another 2.5, 3 weeks of just inks around the clock. And I'm one of those people that I do tend to work on weekends sometimes, even if it's for a couple hours. I've been trying to cut back and have more of a like Monday through Friday schedule, but it just has not been working. Like I'm more of a night owl naturally. And
Yeah.
so from like that 8 p.m. till about 4 a.m., it's like golden for me where I'm just playing music, I'm vibing, and the inks are just going and it feels right. And then when the sun comes up, it's like, okay, go to the gym or breakfast, coffee, read a little bit. And then sometimes I go to bed,
Yeah.
and then I wake up in the afternoon and do it again. I know it's not always the healthiest just because, we all need sun and we all need like uh to be around other people, but sometimes I'm just such a recluse. I just love just to be in the art cave creating. And
And it's
so,
clearly working. I mean,
I mean, I hope so. I hope so. Like, um, and then going back to Speed Force, I was like, okay, how do I even work this in? Because I had never written a mainstream comic. I had written Rick and Morty, stories before, but never like a monthly where I would be handing off my script to someone else. And that was really difficult for me in some ways because I'm such a control freak where I'm used to like writing a story that I'm drawing the pages I've written. Um, and I actually pulled out, I hadn't opened it for months since last July, but the initial pitch I sent to them. Um, and like there's so many things that have changed and like evolved since that initial pitch. But the essence of it like is the same. I really just wanted to show Wallace. Um, I think I'll read it to you. Hold on.
oh yeah, please.
Yeah, like if I yes, one of my goals was I thought it would be cool to show Wallace West in his element, being a cool teen and sharing his hobbies and bonding with other teens. Um, I really wanted to highlight how liked Wallace is by the others, since he's kind of sad or anguished a lot of the time in the main Flash titles.
Hmm.
And while so many other things change, that kind of like I think it kind of landed that throughout like the series.
Definitely.
I really just wanted him to have this strong sense of community. I really wanted him to build this confidence in himself, see where he had areas to grow, and you'll kind of get into that more around issues 3 through 6. Um, but doing that on top of drawing was hell. There's just no way other than to say it was just not easy.
I'm sure.
Um, September through October was like the heavy lifting of it, and it was like I'm writing an issue each week, and I'm also inking like as many pages of Rick and Morty as I can at the same time. And I was just tired and I was exhausted all the time. And I
Mhm.
was honestly very irritable because you're just in your own head. I'm trying to learn this world because I hadn't read a mainstream comic in years.
Mhm.
And it was so overwhelming going into the DCU. And I was using the DC app to try to just get well versed on what was happening, like in, and everything, like what's Superboy doing, what's Superman doing, what's Wonder Woman doing, and it wasn't connecting. And then I found this bookstore in I live in LA, and there's like this bookstore in Simi Valley, and it's kind of like one of those half-price booksellers. And I walked in, and they had a whole graphic novel like shelf, and I went up to the checkout counter with a bunch of. In fact, I'll show you. Like this is just like a chunk of like what I picked up
Oh
from
wow,
them,
yeah.
right? And I was like, I don't know where to start. So I'm just
Yeah.
gonna get everything. And she rang me up and she was like, that sack right there, that was like $8. And my mind was blown because I was expecting to spend so much more just to
Yeah.
get caught up. And so I went back and I just like every couple of days I would just go back and get more books. Like so now I
I'm
have a
gonna have
whole
to go to
shelf.
that bookstore. That sounds like a
Yeah,
good deal.
yeah. they know me by name. They're like, yo,
Yeah,
like we've had all these books in a warehouse, and if you just let us know what you're looking for to complete like your sets, like we'll like pull them from you. And I'm like,
that's awesome.
dang. Yeah, it made everything so much easier for me to grasp. Like I am more tactile in nature,
Hmm.
and it was just something about on that app. I'm like, why is it taking me so long? Like I read, like this is what I do. And when I got the books, it was just like can't
Yeah.
stop, can't put them down. And it helped me so much because like I really wanted to pull as many references as I could to make it feel like this universe that Wallace, is currently in is connected to everything else.
Hmm.
And that was my biggest fear was I just didn't want to disrespect the history of the Flash and the character and the fan base. Like I wasn't aware how big the fandom was until the first issue came out.
Hmm.
Um, and to that point, thank you for reaching out. Thank everyone for the love that they showed. Because I was terrified. I was like, by next Tuesday, like it was like a countdown clock of I'm used to kind of being off the grid, kind of like to myself. And there's gonna be a lot of attention coming my way next Tuesday, and I know it. And I didn't know if it was gonna be good or bad. I just knew it was coming. And I'm kind of like disengaged a little bit from social media. Like I have a very like my life is peaceful, and so I've had to engage more in this space just to see and some of the things other creators are dealing with. I'm like, oh my god, like, and I knew that could have been me,
Hmm.
you know. But I'm also just glad that I wrote the comic in such a way so where people could see that I had an appreciation for the
Yeah.
universe and the world. But it was definitely one of the most challenging experiences of my professional life. Just jumping in, but then also saying, okay, I got to see this out to the finish line. I got to like, I want to tell a nice story, beginning, middle, end, something cool, something different, and then hopefully get Wallace and Avery to these designated endpoints to either set up for more or just to put them in a great shape for the next writer who takes them on too.
Hmm.
And I've had a blast working on it. It was just like, oh my gosh, like turning them out every week. It felt like I was writing a soap opera.
Yeah. So speaking of like Wallace and Avery, can you tell us a little bit more about the inception of the book? Did DC pitch to you a book with these two speedsters, or was that more your idea?
Well, it was definitely those two specifically that they wanted.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, like I can do that. And so it took doing a lot more research, especially on Avery's end, like learning
Mhm.
about the Justice League of China and all of her just other team affiliations. And then also like where do I see her going? Like just based on what I've already read from other creative teams, if I were to just take the lead on this, where would I like to take her in the next like couple of issues, and what do I want to set her up for? And then at the same time, how do her and Wallace work together in this scenario? Because the Speed Force itself as a concept is such a daunting like
Yeah.
concept to just wrap my head around. That I was like, okay, how do I ground these speedsters? And once I just kept connecting to the fact that they were young and thinking about what youth and what youth looks like with these abilities.
Hmm.
Being able to be like a speedster, I'm like, wait, if I was like 16 to 18, because that was the range they gave me when I asked about his age, because that was to determine what I was going to be able to do.
Yeah.
I was like, I would have been losing my mind with this ability. Like, I would have just like, in a whim, like, okay, I'm sad. I'm going to go somewhere where I'm going to feel happy, just like right now.
Hmm.
And when I kept like developing the plot, I just kept always coming back to like, okay, they're still at the end of the day, like they're teens. They have these grand abilities, but also they both have a desire to be respected by the elders of the DCU and taken more seriously. Because as a team, that's what you want. You just want like to essentially be an adult and to have more freedom. And in many ways, they have that with their powers, but they don't really have it in terms of the respect. They don't really have that like that reverence that comes with like Batman or Superman.
Hmm.
And in Avery's case, that agitates her a lot. Whereas Wallace is kind of like more ambivalent to it. He's like, whatever, I'm just gonna go play my video games.
Yeah.
you know? So it was a really fun dynamic. And then once I started like expounding on them with like adding Mr. Terrific, who I was just naturally drawn to when I was reading the books. And this is actually before I knew he had a son, um, who I guess just appeared in Jay Garrick. And
Mhm.
I was like, oh my gosh, like I kind of wrote him in a way that was a bit more paternal. And so to now to see him kind of going through that transition on
it kind
And
of
those
all ended
books,
up coming together.
and I think that's also why they approved it, because there have been so many ideas I've pitched that were rejected. Like, no, we can't have this character do this, or we can't, you can't do this. And that was in many ways like the biggest thorn in my side,
Yeah.
because I'm like, hey, like I just want to have these characters hang out, ticket party, like all that. And they're like, actually, these characters are right now in space. So you have to leave them alone. And I'm
Hmm.
like, but they have their phones. Um, you'll see that in issue 3. Like there's this huge spread that's like one of my like highlights of the entire run.
Hmm.
And when you get, you're gonna know exactly what I'm talking about. You're gonna know exactly why I wanted you to have it. Um, but there were so many characters I had to take out that were originally in this spread because they were all preoccupied with saving the universe,
Other
essentially.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about like spreads like that involving all these characters, I mean, like any Flash book, it's like action packed. You've got the shots of the
Mhm.
characters running, all this cool stuff. Being an artist, are there any moments where like you're coming up with these scenes for this book and you're like, man, I wish I could draw that? Or,
Well, to that point, like, so my scripts were a lot longer than probably they should have been. Like, they were on average about 25 to 30 pages.
mhm,
And a lot of that was just reference material of like, hey, like I'm kind of making a reference to this video game. Like in the first issue, right? Like there's Beastly Biohazard, the
yeah,
fighting game they're playing. I'll also tell you this tidbit. That was originally a booster gold fighting game.
really? Wow.
Yeah, that was like that's how I originally pitched it. It's like they were going to be hanging out playing a booster gold fighting game with a booster gold like tie-in streaming anime. And at some point, I changed it to like these animals. I think because I knew about the DC Beast World event,
Hmm.
and I was like, how do I kind of tie it more into that? So I made them animals, which I'm kind of happy I did because it's kind of cutesy and fun. Um, but the Booster Gold content would have been fun too. Like
That
I
would have
was
been
gonna
really cool
really
to
like,
see.
try to go ham with that, but
It would have made
um,
sense too. Like he put it out there to like market himself, all this stuff. That would have been funny.
yeah. And sorry, I would totally derail talking about Booster
No,
Gold.
please. I love hearing all this stuff.
I had all of these things in the script that I initially pitched that didn't make the cut, but at the essence, it was about really just like where I want to take these two, what do I want to set them up for after Speed Force, and if there's even more Speed Force, like what could I set up that I could continue to build upon
Hmm.
later. And then adding Mr. Terrific, right? Added Mr.
Yeah.
Terrific. That worked out because of the whole paternal component to his character, and then him being a genius, but still being curious about how other people think. Um, I remember, I think I saw a comment where someone was like, why is like Mr. Terrific being taught how to use an app by the kids? I'm like, I mean, he's a genius, but he's not a complete jerk. He doesn't have to be all the time. He could just be curious.
Hmm.
And because of his powers, now he's mastered it. He can learn it. You've given it to him. Now he's going to like run with it, you
Uh-huh.
know? And then Roundhouse, because I found out that, oh, wait, like I read, yes, Titan's Full Throttle here. And
Hmm.
I was like, oh, Wallace and Roundhouse are best friends. Got it. Got to bring him over.
Hmm.
Um, and then Cadence I added because of the whole component of the missing scientist. I was like, I kind of like the idea of having a character who, when all the other scientists in the story go missing due to the fiddler, essentially, and like this new company called Symphony, what if there was someone who was left behind? And then I'm like, well, how do I make that make sense? I'm like, oh, wait, if she's in college too, like she's young, she's an intern, she's technically not like what he wants, so
Hmm.
she's left behind, which was also just kind of funny to me. Like she just watched all of her peers disappear.
Yeah.
Um, I also just wanted to have like in the supporting cast a character who was not only learning about the speedsters, who had a natural interest in science and biochemistry, but who just also wanted to connect and to see how these heroes would connect with someone who wasn't a speedster as well. I
Hmm.
thought that would be a more interesting dynamic that I could explore. So that's why I also included her. Um, and then Superboy,
Yeah.
who
Connell. I had some questions about him.
oh, go for it, go for it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just wanted to know, like, since, I mean, with Mr. Terrific, like, he's been in Jeremy Adams' Flash run, especially, he was brought in that, like, he's a huge player in the Flash family right now. That
Right.
Connell, not so much. I was wondering, like, where that idea sparked to form that friendship.
I think it's because like whenever I think about just like different comics I've enjoyed, or even just different stories, I've always liked the unlikely pairings
Hmm.
where I don't know, like take Dragon Ball Goku Vegeta, like
Yeah.
complete rivals at the very beginning of the story, but now family.
Hmm.
And when I was thinking about Wallace and his powers and actually like how insanely ridiculous it must be to be a speedster with that much power, I thought, well, who else would he connect to in the DCU? And Wallace is cocky, and he's a gamer. He's kind of cocky. In fact, every like time I saw him, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I like this kid because he's kind of like, kind of a jerk a little bit. And Superboy just kept like, I kept thinking like, I think they would be good friends. Like I think they would vibe, and I think they would like give each other crap,
Yeah.
and that could be a fun dynamic. And at first, I was thinking Damian Wayne because of the whole father component. I was like, I
Mm.
really think because of their hardships and tumultuous relationships with dads or their just lack of being around. In Watson's case, even grief, maybe he would connect with someone like Damien, but Damien, I wasn't allowed to.
Hmm.
And so then I pitched like Superboy, and I think even they were like, that's kind of interesting.
Hmm.
And
It's
then
cool
by the
too
time
since he
you,
just had his own mini.
yes, yes, and I had read, I forget the name of, I don't know if they were called the Cosmeteers, but I read an arc with him and these like four beings from outer space, and it was just really interesting. And I kind of pulled some stuff from that, like the Zeta bracelet that he uses to speak like alien
Mhm.
languages, and I'm like, ooh, I can use that. That's a really cool device. And as I was writing, it just felt like the banter reminded me of some of my best friends between him and Wallace. And like, have you read issue 2 yet?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. And I don't know if this is a spoiler for anyone watching, but I'll just go ahead and say
yeah.
spoiler.
Go read Speed Force if you haven't already.
Sweet, sweet. Yeah, no, like they go when Wallace goes with Connor to the Fortress of Solitude, and it's just sort of like a kid in a candy store with that moment.
Hmm.
Like that was so much fun to write because I kept thinking like, yeah, Wallace is so like he's able to go everywhere, but he's never really had a reason to I don't believe to go here. And I thought that would also kind of show how close him and Connor are becoming by him kind of welcoming him into his like non-Smallville.
Hmm.
And just to see Wallace just losing his crap, just checking out memorabilia, like, wait, Superman has an account on the app too, like the Wendy the Werewolf references, like Helix was so much fun to write.
Yeah.
Um, and Helix is like one of two robots I got to use in Speed Force, and I'm realizing I really like writing robots,
Yeah.
especially sassy robots. Because like some of my favorite lines were just watching Helix give Connor crap, but really liking
That's fair.
Wallace. Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
And then people like, yeah, you're right. Like Connor really cocky. I'm like, yeah, he just always like even as I was a kid, he always just felt like I have a chip on my shoulder, and I just wanted to lean into that because Wallace does too. You
Hmm.
know.
I mean, yeah. Speaking of issue 2, one, it's kind of funny. On every interview I've had with a different Flash creator, at the very end, I've
Yeah.
asked the question, and I asked Mark Waid, I asked Jeremy Adams what music that their Flashes listen to, but it's kind of easy to tell from your book since the app is so like connected with music. It was pretty funny because when I like have this vision in my head of like Flashes running, it's usually to like 70s, 80s like hair rock, and there's actually like a very Welcome to the Jungle inspired like verse, it seems like in issue 2, that was really cool to see.
No, I'm glad you appreciate that. Also, shout out to like you said, Mark Wade, Jeremy Adams, like
Hmm.
the go, like they made my job so much easier, just like being able to reference, and also everybody on the Flash like family of books from Psy, to A.L. Kaplan, just everybody. They were like Alex. I sat in on a writer's call with them back in I want to say August.
Yeah.
Like I was like, what am I going to even contribute? At the time, my idea was just that, like it was in the putty stage. And I'm like, what am I even doing on this call with like Psy of all
Yeah.
people? Like at the time, I think Flash #1 was getting ready to drop. And
Oh, okay.
so, and that's one of the coolest things I will say is like I got to read up to I want to say main Flash #5. And I think that's coming out in maybe a couple of weeks. And so I love being able to kind of read these comics before they drop.
That's amazing. That's so cool.
Because like it allows me to make sure that what I'm referencing makes sense. And throughout Speed Force, I really wanted to show what uh as we call him in Speed Force, Uncle Barry's doing. Like what
Mhm.
like because it's crazy what he's going through over there, by the way. And so I was like, how can I like connect it? And so every now and then you'll just see like Wallace running by a TV screen or like a coffee shop where they're playing like what he's dealing with.
Mhm.
Um but yeah, just being in that meeting was just like really surreal. And back to your original point about the music, and that, I'm sorry, you can see my brain just like
No, please, like I said.
um that was so much fun to write. Like right now, in terms of all my books, like I just did this book about hip hop. I have another book coming out, and I noticed that I just am really into making sure the music reflects the world. And
Mhm.
it was so cool as I'm reading all these DC books, just learning the lore, being able to like, okay, write that down. Like
Mhm.
I had a little bar, like a rap bar about um, Stag, Sapphire, and like I was just making little like rap lyrics in my script. I'm like, yo, you gotta like throw that into your script. You gotta like read these other comics, and then you can reference them just even in like rap lyrics, like
Mhm.
in random background shots of the Force, or if one of the characters is on their phone, um, have these like rappers within the app symphony in those books delivering lines that directly reference the DCU. I kept thinking, like, yo, if I were a rapper living in a world of superheroes, like, just like rappers today reference like mobsters and like just celebrities, athletes. If
Mhm.
you were a rapper in the DCU, you're going to reference superheroes. And it
Naturally,
just
yeah.
really, yeah, and it just kind of like helped really just make the world, I think, feel a little bit more immersive. Um, and then tapping into like speed force and music and frequencies, it just felt like it just all gelled really
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Like, so kind of, I'm jumping around a bit too. Like you
Good.
you had mentioned like the communication and like you got to read some Flash issues early. One thing
Mm-hmm.
that like I really love about the DC universe is how connected it feels, especially right now in the dawn of DCU. You have characters appearing across multiple books, and like you said, they're
Mm-hmm.
referencing what's going on everywhere. I've been really liking the events lately, and you even got to work on the tie-in issue for Beast World Central City. And I was
Yes. Yeah.
wondering for that, and also just working on Speed Force in general, what's your communication like with Cy Spurrier, who's writing the main Flash book? Are you guys making sure that the continuity's flowing, especially with an issue like this, that both books can tie in?
Well, honestly, like I haven't talked to Sai since that meeting back in
Mhm.
August. But it's important for me to make sure when I send my script to the editor will always like send back feedback of like, hey, like this is what's getting ready to happen. So you might want to tweak this.
Yeah.
I can't say specifically another villain that was supposed to appear in Speed Force, but I literally could not use him because of a major thing happening in another book. And I was like, all right, so the editors kind of like keep you on like track
Hmm.
because they're aware of what's going down more than I am.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even imagine reaching out to any of the writers. Just not imagine like, yo, if I'm busy, I'm assuming they're busy with like writing their book and then their personal life too.
Hmm.
Like, because that's the hardest part is like, yo, finding the time to balance, like, okay, I have to lock in, I have to do this, I have to have this script in by Friday. And then also like managing like my day-to-day matters with my partner and just like, yo, like I can't just be in this room either. I have to get out.
Yeah.
But sometimes the demands are intense. It's like, yo, I have to have this in by morning because maybe, how do I put it? Like, there's some drafts where the artist is getting notes right up to the wire. And that is terrifying for me, right? Because I'm used to being on the other side as an artist. And when I get like a script with tweaks right before print, it is like the world stops. This has to get done because if I don't have this in, the colorist can't recolor it, letterer can't like adjust, and it can delay a book, which is like just hell for everybody, right? And so for me, it's been the balancing act of like writing, tweaking, and then even though I wrote a lot of these issues back in October, they're still being tweaked because of changes happening in the DC.
Hmm.
And so that's where it does feel like I'm writing a soap opera that's like connected to other soap operas.
I'm sure too, especially writing a Flash book. There's so many speedsters, there's so many members of the Flash family. It's hard to
Yes.
keep tabs on where everyone is. Even I don't know as a reader reading half these
And
books.
see, I'm so happy to hear that because like coming in, I was like, oh my God, like I have to learn every speedster. I have to learn
It
like
gets
who
overwhelming, but
it
you learn to love
does.
them all.
Right. And like it made it so much easier even when writing Speed Force. Once I knew that Barry was gonna be preoccupied, I was like, okay. But
Yeah.
then that also set me like, wait a minute, like he's usually the anchor to most stories. And I am just being allowed to do the run. And it was low key challenging, but it was exciting. So I'm like, yo, I can put Wallace and Avery in some of the craziest scenarios and essentially give them a really cool like spin-off mini mission subquest, whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
that helps develop their rogues gallery, helps develop like their
Exactly.
stories moving forward. And that's what's probably like I feel like now that I know where it ends up, I feel like I've done that. And I'm just hoping I get to do more. Like I have like some other proposals, some one-shot ideas, and like I just hope I'm just given the chance to just keep going. But even if I don't, I think another writer will have a field day for sure.
As a reader, it's great to hear everything you're saying, especially with the Flash family. The Flash family, it's all about legacy. It's all about where these characters can end up. So like your emphasis on where can I bring these characters? What's the next step in their journey? That's like really cool to hear too. Um,
And and you know what? I was going to say that Danielle, Nicolo and Francesco Mortarino, the two artists who work on Speed Force
mhm.
One, they alternate duty to number two, and then I think right now Danielle's doing issue five. Um, they've been killing it. It's like when you see their work coming in every morning, I'll wake up and they're based in Italy, I believe, Italy or Spain. I want to say Italy. Um, I'll wake up and I'm like, man, this art is insane.
Yeah.
And I'll see his art, and then I'm like working on Rick and Morty. I'm like, yo, like I can't shortcut this job because Danielle is over here doing some craziness with like these environments. And when I was describing like certain fight scenes, he just got it. Like he just understood. Like I guess he had done all this great work on Power Rangers and um, even Francesco. Like Francesco did that whole Fortress of Solitude scene
Mhm.
and just hit all the beats perfectly, even down to like Connor Kent's little puff of hair and like just the overall like coolness and just the excitement Wallace would have. Like I'm really blessed, lucky, fortunate to have like these really phenomenal artists.
Mhm.
So as I'm writing, I know like okay, they can pull this off. They can interpret this. And there's all these like little like kind of anime sort of influence like little chibi heads and sort of meme almost sort of moments, and they just get the humor. Because I did want this to feel like the sort of like weird Saturday morning cartoon, like offshoot Flash comic, and I wanted it to be campy and weird, and the campiness, like especially in issue three, which I'm gonna keep talking about, because you're gonna see the spread and you're gonna be like, yo, like I was trying to tap into like 1980s and 90s TV sitcoms, and like that shot where you would see characters phone each other and it would just sort of
Oh,
like
okay.
be in little Zoom blocks. I did that, but it's with DCU heroes.
Ooh.
And it was so much fun to write. It was so hard to write. But then to see how Danielle interpreted it, I was like,
Yeah. So like working with all these heroes then, since you've been able to bring all these different characters into the book, gearing things a little bit away from Speed Force,
mhm.
now that you know you're on DC's radar, are there any other projects you'd like to do with them? Any characters you're dying to take a crack at, or were hoping to put in Speed Force that you weren't able to, so you'd like to do something else with them later?
There
If there's
is,
anything you're able to talk about like that, yeah.
yeah, like there's one that's kind of, again, when you see issue three,
Yeah.
you'll be like, that's what he's talking about. That's what he's referencing. But like, again, at the core of this, I was like, I really want to show Wallace's friends and their dynamics. And everyone I kind of featured, I'm like, I would be kind of like, another like Kid Flash and Superboy like moment. I could see that. I could see like even a Roundhouse and Superboy moment. I could
Hmm.
see that. So I'm open. I just want to be open to the possibilities because I've never considered this.
Hmm.
So the Bat family just seems so daunting and overwhelming. But so did like the Flash family. So like I'm curious, but I'm also like that's the tone would have to be different. Like my storytelling is a bit more comedic, a little bit more like light, fun. And how would I like I'm reading Three Jokers and I just keep looking through. I'm like, this is great, but also I don't think I could ever tell a story.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm just gonna be open. I'm gonna be open to the possibilities, and then also like um, who knows? They might be like, hey, just can you just do like one more Speed Force one shot? And I'll be yes, but I have
Mhm.
something ready. Uh, so we'll see. But I'm open because it has been fun. It's been challenging. The deadlines have been insane. The pace, but like when I see like what's happening, like with Beetle, when I see what's happening, like in all these different stores, I'm just like, yeah, that could be fun to like do something over
Hmm.
there.
Yeah, well, I hope I get to see it then. As soon as issue 3 comes out then and I see what you're talking about, I'm definitely gonna write you back right
Yeah,
away.
look for it in the mail. I think you'd be like,
Yeah.
I
I'm
actually want to know
excited.
your feedback for sure. I want to know how you feel about it.
I will. I'll let you know. I promise. I promise. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's been a lot of my questions about Speed Force. I have
Okay.
some other questions about some of your
Sure.
other work.
Sure.
This is way different from Flash, but I found out one of your first professional works was actually in a Yo Gabba Gabba collection, which was really
Yo,
cool to me
yes.
'cause that was one of the shows I watched growing up when I was really young. So I was
Yeah,
wondering
this
what that
guy,
experience was like.
that was my very first like published anything.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying. Like once again, I think this was around 2010 or 11. And I was in college at the time. Or maybe even earlier than that, actually, if I was in college. Trying to see if they have it anywhere. Yeah, 2011. So I
Wow.
was getting ready to be finished when I go to graduate school.
Hmm.
And the editor, James Lucas Jones, said, "Hey, we're doing this anthology. Do you watch Yo Gabba Gabba?" Like, everybody's like familiar with it. Like,
Yeah.
every rapper on the planet's like going on this show. And I was like, yeah. And they're like, yo, would you want to do a story? And I was like, hell yeah. And that's one of the things where you just say yes without really thinking it out. You're like, sure. And I got the script, and the challenge was at the time I had a really hard time with just my style wasn't, I think, what the creators of the show wanted to see for that story. So I had to tweak some things, tweak some character designs until they were really satisfied with the designs.
Hmm.
And when that came out, that was just mad exciting. Like, um, I think that first time you ever see your like work in print when you wanted that is like really, really special.
Hmm.
And there was like a long period of time between that and my next thing, which was like Super Pro.
Hmm.
Um, Actually, I think it might have been the other way around. I did Super Pro, and then that came out. But either way, I remember that felt special because it was like my first time being part of a collective anthology, and like
Hmm.
on that scale. And then also with something that my mom knew what that was, you know.
Yeah.
So
On You bring up Super Pro KO, a wrestling comic produced by Oni Press. It's filled with these action-packed and
yeah,
iconic
sure.
characters. Could you tell us a bit about your inspirations for that book and how you got it to the hands of Oni?
I was working on this because I got some feedback from another editor who I talked to one of my professors, Bob Pendarvis. It was Chris Staros, who was the editor of Top Shelf. And they were like, Jared's good, but I think if Jared actually like just pitch anything else besides at the time I was trying to pitch Leaderboard, my webcomic.
Yeah.
And Chris was like, if he just did anything else, I think he would get it out there easy. And that's when I started thinking about doing something else. It took an editor saying, hey, just consider it, just try. And I didn't even take it as a fight. I didn't take it as they didn't like my webcomic. I took it as, hey, they might not be able to do anything with this, or it might be something too similar to what they already have like
Mhm.
published. But either way, I took the advice and started working on a pro wrestling webcomic. And at the time, I was trying to tell the story of this pro wrestler named Joe Somiano, who was a kid. And it was like a kid wrestling league. And at some point, I just kind of said, oh, I don't know if I want to keep drawing this. But what if I made them like adults?
Mhm.
And then it clicked. It was like, oh wait, they can like have them do all kind of craziness. They can go to bars. They can get in bar fights. They can draw table matches. I can draw like steel cage matches. So I was really, really, really into pro wrestling. I haven't watched as much recently. Like I find myself like when AEW is on, like when it comes on YouTube or something, I will just stop and watch.
Yeah.
And same for clips of like SmackDown usually because I'm really into like the Usos and what's going on with them. And so I'm like, I notice I still watch, but not to the same capacity I once was.
Mhm.
Um, but I grew up, like I said, everybody was watching sports, and I'm like in the room, and if I'm in the room, I'm either playing video games, and if it's Monday night, y'all are watching football, I was watching wrestling. And
Mhm.
I was the kid that was going back and forth between like, WWF at the time and WCW. And I just wanted to do a comic that kind of tapped into that. And it was a blast, like I got to meet so many wrestlers. I got to uh it was interesting like hearing that like my comic was like that certain wrestlers knew about it, but they couldn't like tweet about
Really?
it. And that was interesting. I was like, because at the time I was like, I know they have to like, I know it's on their ring. There's
Yeah.
no way it's on their ring. Um, but it was just really cool being able to like, in a way, kind of honor the sport and the profession that way, because I can say, like, addition to my life, I was just entertained by the exploits of like Rick Rude and um, Bobby Heenan and just all these classic wrestlers. And there's so much like history and lore in wrestling that is very much similar to comic books and the history and lore in like a Flash or whatever. So it was Super Pro was definitely like I think the book that kind of helped like set me up on the trajectory of like people saying, oh wait, this is a guy who likes doing like just unique sort of ideas and
Hmm.
kind of bold concepts. And a lot of that energy in Speed Force is definitely in Super Pro too. Like just the way I like to, choreograph action scenes. And I want to do more with Super Pro. I do. It's just been like a time thing. It's like I don't want to. When I was working on Super Pro, I was dead broke. Like,
Yeah.
and I just never want to go back to that
Yeah.
place where I'm like, I'm doing it for the love, but I really need some money. And now it's
Yeah.
like, okay, let me just like focus on things that are generating like, income, and I feel good. But I know when the next one comes out, it's going to be dope, just because my art has evolved so much since then.
Hmm.
And that's the hardest part as an artist. Is sometimes when you look back, like, when I looked at the Yo Gabba Gabba work, I was like, oh my God, but he looks so differently now. I would have printed it differently. The whole being able to let go part is like sometimes the most difficult part of being an artist.
Hmm. That makes sense. I mean, like, so yeah, also through Oni Press, you've, I mean, been able to work on a lot of Rick and Morty comics. We have Maximum Crescendo and Kingdom Balls coming out later this year. What's your experience been working on those Rick and Morty comics, but also just adaptations of animated shows in general? Because I know you've also done some Adventure Time, Invader Zim. I actually found out while doing research for this interview, you did a cover for the Boom Regular Show comic, which is a series that I love too.
I love that show. I did a cover for regular show. I did one cover for them, and then I did one cover for Powerpuff Girls, and those two were
Oh
both
yeah.
like really special to me
Yeah.
because and I was hoping to get more work on both sides and never did. That's the funny part about licensed comics is you're like, yeah, this is my foot in the door. Oh no, you just did a variant.
Mhm.
And I just had to like
Yeah.
be okay with it. But also I never proposed an idea. I just wanted like an idea to come to me.
Mhm.
Um, but no, like there's pros and cons. So the pros are all the material is right there to reference. And like when I see cartoons, all I see are shapes.
Mhm.
So like if you put Bart Simpson here, I'm gonna be able to draw Bart Simpson. I just see like the eyeballs and like the rectangle head and the spikes. And it's the same with like Rick and Morty. I just see like their big eyes, their big weird oval heads, bags under their eyes. Like it's easy for me to articulate the shows, and it's great being able to reference, like put on an episode from whatever season and just say, oh, okay, like these are how the environments look in the living room or on this planet. And I get to do a little bit of like creative. I have a little bit more creative freedom. A lot of the stories I draw are usually like some of them are more original, where I have to design some original characters. Um, but on the pro side, the fandom is great in terms of like support. Like the work has been consistent. I can do some really, really fun ideas and just like kind of go all out on covers, which I love. I love doing the cover work I've done on that series more than probably anything else.
Yeah.
But the cons are the legalities. The cons are like the last minute tweaks and changes to a script, and it could even be something that was approved um, by the powers that be, even beyond the publisher, and then notes come back after it's drawn, and you then have to be like, wait, but you approved this. Why am I
Yeah.
having to redraw this? And any creative will tell you they hate redraws. They hate it just because it's essentially like the artistic equivalent of overtime. But at the same time, I always do it. I
Mhm.
suck it up. I bet I punch something. I might like go
Yeah.
ninja, whatever. But that's the cons. The cons are just sort of the tweaking that happens well beyond the point that they should still be happening. But you know what's funny? That happens on the animation side too. Like
Mhm.
all of my animator friends deal with the same hell when they're producing a show. So I don't know if there's any way around it.
Yeah. So I just speaking of Rick and Morty, I heard that you hadn't actually seen Rick and Morty when you were first offered the gig, but like you said like you loved it and then like secretly binged it. Is that true?
That is
Okay.
true. Because like, okay, they reach out and they're like, hey, like, are you interested? At the time, I am like broke, broke, broke,
You
broke,
can't
broke.
say no.
Can't say no.
Yeah.
And then you just go do your homework. You know, you're like, yo, I gotta like figure this out. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I can do this. I can do
Hmm.
this. And it was cool because I didn't have to write the story. So once the script was handed to me and I had already watched the source material, all right, I'll run with it. And I do think the comics I'm drawing now are great because I've seen so many episodes and I've drawn like hundreds of pages of this comic. Um, so I'm really excited for the ones that are coming. Like the Kingdom Ball story is like dope. And
Yeah.
it's funny because I have this weird history with Josh Trujillo. Like Josh Trujillo is like the writer of Kingdom Balls. He's also currently writing Blue Beetle. And so it's like I'm seeing him in DC. I'm doing stuff with him over
You
here.
reference Jaime in issue 1.
Yes, I
Mhm.
do. I'm a big fan of like what they're doing over there on Blue Beetle right now, just because it feels so unique and different.
It feels very
And
Power
it
Rangers. It's super cool.
very and Adrian's killing it, like in terms of just the style and the movement. I was just really drawn to how dynamic it is. And it's funny because it's like the polar opposite in terms of like the stuff I'm drawing for Josh. And it just kind of like
Mhm.
gives me a peek into his writing brain a bit.
That's cool.
Um, and it is cool because like even now I'm like, man, I just did this book about like history of hip hop that is so different from
Mhm.
anything else like from Speed Force because it's so much more geared towards kids and it's more of an educational textbook style of writing. And so it's cool when I see other writers kind of flex their chops in creative ways too. Like, okay, I'm gonna tell this more shonen sort of story.
Mhm.
And then like Kingdom Balls is like more JRPG, Kingdom Hearts kind of stuff.
Mhm. It's cool that you're working on that like history of hip hop comic because I mean even in Speed Force like it's very music based the plot right now. Yo Gabba Gabba like we said like it's a very hip hop based
Mhm.
show that like it's cool like that you're able to promote it through this medium.
Yeah, like I'll show you. It just came out like this week too.
Mhm.
And it was hands down like one of the hardest books like I've ever drawn just because my style is so cartoony, but I'm like, hey, I can't go too cartoony with these actual rap figures. I have to
Yeah.
make it to where you can kind of tell that's who that is. And so like I have like these shots of like Wu Tang and like just so many people, like hundreds of rappers. And it took like 3 years. The edits alone were insane. I think
Yeah.
like I didn't expect when I pitched this just how like much it would be combed through by legal departments because there's like a limit on how many like rap lyrics you can say
Mm.
in print. Like I couldn't just take a whole song and just like plaster it, right?
Yeah.
So just that kind of thing where you're like, well, how do I tell this story, feature all these artists? I need to like have reference points of their rap songs and the time and the year that they came out. Um, how do I do all of this and then also get away with it, get away with publishing it? I'm just ultimately trying to educate kids about these figures in kind of a time capsule kind of way. And then I created this sort of overarching narrative of a father pretty much teaching his daughter about the origins of hip hop because he grew up like in New York and he was a b-boy himself. And that's when it kind of grounded it. And
Mhm.
for me, when you find a way to ground like a really insane plot, it really helps. Like, okay, that's like as long as I just stick to that, like that's the glue to all of this. It'll make it make sense.
Mhm.
And it was the same approach I had for Speed Force too. Like it's always about Avery and Wallace. It's always about how they're connected. It's always about like even if one of them's over there doing this, the other one's doing that and thinking about them and what they're doing. Um,
It sounds like you make sure that initial pitch like the pure essence of it always stays there to the final product.
yeah, only because like I was worried that well, a number of things. I'm like, okay, let's say this for whatever reason, like it's canceled, because that happens all the time too. I'm like, I at least want to feel like I set up something that was so exciting in issue one to where you might want to come back for issues two, three, four, five.
Mhm.
Um, but also I just didn't want to lose the mark. I didn't want to, and I will say this, having Barry dealing with like the craziness that Barry's dealing with, it's like, all right, I'm going to keep Wallace and Avery more grounded. They're like on a baby mission by comparison. And that really helped just knock a lot of the edge off. Because sometimes you like, I'm not gonna lie, my instinct when I was initially getting ready to pitch Speed Force was to go like the universe is collapsing, colliding, like just you know, like no, no, keep it grounded, keep it focused, keep them in Central City whenever you can.
Yeah.
Because it is like a really like it's like just them having those abilities, you kind of just want to take them everywhere.
Mhm. That's funny that they're like, keep it in Central City, and you're like, I actually want them to go to the Fortress of Solitude, so that's not really gonna work out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I will say they were open to whatever. I was the one
Mhm.
that was like, I got to keep them as Central
Oh
City
yeah,
as
yeah. I see what
possible,
you mean.
just to keep myself on track. Because
Mhm.
sometimes it's like I have these crazy ideas. I'm like, well, I only have 20 pages. Like,
Yeah.
and that has also been the hardest part too. Like, I'm so used to writing books where you can just go on and on and on and like
Mhm.
have 5 pages or whatever for something to breathe. And with Speed Force, I just couldn't do this. So I'm thinking, okay, how is this going to feel when it's collected? When it's collected, I want this to feel good in book form, but I also want you to be satisfied reading this
Yeah.
issue to issue. There's such an art to it. Like Jeremy, Saad, they perfected the art. I knew I'm getting like my feet wet in this, and I'm trying to learn it. But it's its own beast. It's a lot more challenging than I expected, for
Mhm.
sure.
Well, I appreciate all the advice you've given. We can start wrapping up now. I've taken up more of
Okay.
your time than I told
Oh
you I
no,
would
no, this was
already,
fun.
but
This was fun.
just
This
as
was
like
fun.
a final note then, do you have any you shared a lot of your experience, which I and I'm sure all the listeners really appreciate. Do you have any other advice for people interested in breaking into comics, whether it be the writing or the artist realm of things?
Ooh, good question. I would say, excuse me, on the artist side, you kind of have to have, excuse me, um, you just kind of have to have the work. You have to have the art. So like, I believe that what helped me get my foot in the door was when I was pitching even Super Pro KO. I had at least 20 to 30 pages already that I was working on.
Mhm.
I don't even think you need that much. I think if you had just maybe 5 to 10 pages of art to reflect your concept, it gives people a general idea of like what you're trying to do and your vision for it. And when I had those initial like 20, 30 Super Pro KO pages, I had like some fight sequences. Then I also had sequences of just characters talking and how I would showcase that because there is an art to making that interesting visually, you
Mhm.
know? And so I think just having scenes that are maybe like night and day within the same story when you're pitching helps. But again, as an artist, you just kind of have to have the art. You have to have the art to show. And only because so many other artists have the art to show when they're pitching ideas too.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the like bare minimum, I think. And then as a writer, it is for sure harder, I think, in terms of like convincing um, people of your idea, especially if you aren't already an established writer. Like if you're trying to get a foot in the door, you kind of have to have like sample pages and hopefully maybe even 1 or 2 pages of an artist interpreting your story,
Mhm.
or at least an art style that you think complements your writing style. Because that's the key too, is finding somebody that can like enhance your writing um, visually. So I will say I came in on the artist side, so I know that side well. Just having pages
Yeah.
ready, taking feedback from people you show your pages to, and then I always address their feedback. I mentioned James Lucas Jones, he was like my editor, or I was doing portfolio reviews with him before he was my editor, and he would give me notes, and then the next time he saw me a year later, I had them. Now that's a lot of time between like showing somebody your work and then I'm showing you my work again in a year.
Mhm.
It's like I had a lot of new things to show, you know, and it was not easy. It was not easy juggling all of that with the day job, but that was in college, relationships, like all that. It wasn't easy, but I also knew like, hey, like that person over there is doing it. Like it just was. I would say to get really good at dedicating yourself and developing the discipline of creating daily.
Mhm.
So on average right now, and I know I'm sorry if I'm keeping you going too.
No, no worries.
Yeah, no, on average, I work about 8 to 12 hours a day. 10
Mhm.
to 12 is probably like me being lenient. I have some moments where I just get lost, and it's because I'm doing more than one project. Um, but I do have that ability to wake up and just self direct myself.
Mhm.
And I think if you just start cultivating that skill even before you work in the industry professionally, you'll be fine. I think I see a lot of creators who are new to comics struggle with developing that if they don't already have it.
Mhm.
So,
Thank you so much. That's extremely helpful advice, I'm sure, on both ends too. So yeah, again, just thank you so much for coming on. I hope we could do this again. Hopefully when
I
Speed
do
Force
too. I do too.
wraps up and continues. Yeah, I'll let you know. Like I said, as soon as when I read issue 3, I can't wait.
And thank you again for taking the time to share your platform with me. I truly appreciate it. So, thank you.
Of course, of course. Well, thank you so much.
All right.